In this video lesson, we'll discuss the arts and the creation of the literary movement in America. Early Americans, confronted with pioneering problems, were more interested in practical gadgets than in pure science. Thomas Jefferson was a gifted amateur inventor, and noteworthy were the writings of mathematician Nathaniel Bowditch on practical navigation and of oceanographer Matthew Maury on ocean winds and currents. But as far as basic science was concerned, Americans were best known for borrowing and adapting the findings of Europeans. Yet the Republic was not without scientific talent. The most influential American scientist of the first half of the 19th century was Professor Benjamin Silliman, a pioneer chemist and geologist who taught at Yale. Professor Louis Agassiz, a distinguished French-Swiss immigrant, served for a quarter of a century at Harvard College as a path-breaking student of biology. And Professor Asa Gray of Harvard College published 350 books, monographs, and papers. Lovers of American bird lore owed much to the French-descended naturalist John Audubon, who painted wildfowl in their natural habitat. Medicine in America, despite a steady growth of medical schools, was still primitive by modern standards. Bleeding remained a common cure and a curse as well. Smallpox plagues were still dreaded, and the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 in Philadelphia took several thousand lives, and there were daily cries of corpse wagon drivers. People everywhere complained of ill health. Malaria, the rheumatics, the miseries, and the chills. Illnesses often resulted from improper diet, hurried eating, perspiring and cooling off too rapidly, and ignorance of germs and sanitation. Life expectancy was still dismally short, about 40 years for a white person born in 1850, and less for blacks. Suffering from decayed teeth was an enormous problem. Self-prescribed patent medicines were common. Fad diets continued to be popular, and home remedies were very, very common, such as rubbing of tumors with dead toads, and the use of medicine by regular doctors was often more harmful than it was helpful. Medical progress came in the early 1840s when several American doctors and dentists, working independently, successfully employed laughing gas and ether as anesthetics. Architecturally, America contributed little of note to the first half of the century. The First Republic continued to imitate European models. Public buildings and other important structures followed Greek and Roman lines, which seemed out of place. A remarkable Greek revival came between 1820 and 1850, partly stimulated by the heroic efforts of the Greeks in the 1820s to gather independence from the Turks. About mid-century, strong interest developed in a revival of Gothic forms. Talented Thomas Jefferson, architect of the Revolution, was probably the ablest American architect of his generation. He brought a classical design to his home, Monticello. The art of painting continued to be handicapped. It suffered from the dollar-grabbing of raw civilization, from the hustle, bustle, and absence of leisure, from the lack of a wealthy class to sit for portraits, and then pay for them. Some of the earliest painters were forced to go back to England, where they found both training and people who wanted to be painted and who would pay for it. Painting, like the theater, also suffered from the Puritan prejudice that art was a sinful waste of time, and often obscene. Competent painters nevertheless did emerge. Gilbert Stuart, a spendthrift Rhode Islander and one of the most gifted in the early group, wielded his brush in Britain in competition with the best artists. Charles Willson Peale painted some 60 portraits of George Washington, and John Trumbull recaptured its scenes and spirits on scores of striking canvases. Trumbull's paintings can be seen here and here. During the nationalistic upsurge after the War of 1812, American painters such as Trumbull turned their portraits increasingly from human landscapes to romantic mirrorings of local landscapes, and even to romantic renderings of scenes from the American Revolution time period. The Hudson River School excelled in this type of art. At the same time, portrait painters gradually encountered some unwelcome competition from the invention of a crude photograph known as the daguerreotype. Music was slowly shaking off the restraints of colonial days, when prim Puritans had frowned upon non-religious singing. Rhythmic and nostalgic darky tunes, popularized by whites, were becoming immense hits by the mid-century. The most famous black songs came from a white Pennsylvanian named Stephen Foster, who made a valuable contribution to American folk music by capturing plaintive spirit of slaves. The painful truth was that the nation's rough-hewn, pioneering civilization gave little encouragement to polite literature. Much of the reading matter was imported from England or from Europe. Busy conquering a continent, the Americans poured out most of their creative efforts into very practical outlets. Praiseworthy were political essays like the Federalists of Hamilton, Jay, and Madison, pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and political orations like masterpieces from Daniel Webster, and Ben Franklin's autobiography was also a distinguished work. A genuinely American literature received a strong boost from the wave of nationalism that followed the War of Independence, and especially after the War of 1812. Washington Irving was the first American to win international recognition as a literary figure by publishing in 1809 his Knickerbocker's History of New York. In 1819 to 1820 he published The Sketchbook, which brought him immediate fame at home and abroad. Combining a pleasing style with delicate charm and quiet humor, he used English as well as American themes and included such immortal Dutch-American tales such as Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Europe was amazed at an American with a feather in his hand. Turning to Spanish locals and biography, Irving interpreted America to Europe and Europe to America. James Fenimore Cooper was the first American novelist, as Washington Irving was the first general writer, to gain world fame and to make New World themes respectable. Cooper launched out upon an illustrious career in 1821 with his second novel, The Spy, which was an absorbing tale of the American Revolution. His stories of the sea were meteorous and popular, but his fame rests mostly on the leather-stocking tales. James Fenimore Cooper's novels had a wide sale among Europeans, some of whom came to think of all American people as born with a tomahawk in their hand. Actually, Cooper was exploring the viability and destiny of America's Republic experiment by contrasting the undefiled values of natural men, children of the wooded wilderness, with the artificiality of modern civilization. A third member of the Knickerbocker group in New York was the belated Puritan William Cullen Bryant. At age 16, he wrote the meditative and melancholy Thanatopolis, which was one of the first high-quality poems produced in the United States. We'll discuss more about the literary works that we discussed here in this PowerPoint, in this video, and about the blossoming of the American literature scene in class.